How's it going, everyone? So what we're going to be doing in this video is continuing our Highpoly, and this will be the last part of our Highpoly where we're actually working on the model itself. The next part will be decimating it and bringing it back into Maya, but with this part what we're going to be doing is adding some damage. We're going to be doing a nice cool damage pass on everything. This is a good time to really have your reference handy. We have everything inside of ZBrush right now. Everything is in a state where we can actually sculpt directly onto it. So let's go ahead and kind of find some places where it would be nice to have custom damage. Importing all the screws was definitely a bit overkill, but we can use this as an opportunity to kind of like chip away at some of the interiors and have like it kind of look like it was stripped away from a screwdriver or something like that. So if you have too many screws in one area, it's a good thing to kind of break it up, not just with rotation, but with the actual damage to the edge of it. But I'm just trying to find a good example of like a metal piece that looks a little bit banged up or something like that. Like some little chips right there, but that's mostly in the paint. If we look at the back here, we might get some unevenness in these like teeth areas. Some of these edges might be a little dinged in. Stuff like that right there. So we're going to be doing a damage pass, and we're not going to have to go over everything because not everything is going to have wear and tear on it, but anything that you think would be like used a lot or moved or a person would be touching and interacting with quite a bit. Stuff like this in the interior is probably a lot less likely to be kind of manhandled and beaten up a bit. But when I was looking through my reference, I did see a lot of stuff on Google Images of like really old and overworked machines, and you can definitely see it in that. I definitely should have grabbed some of that reference, but some of these edges here being a little kind of like punched in a little bit, getting rid of how uniform a lot of this stuff is, like scraping these edges here. It'd be nice to do a little pass. Stuff like this is really nice, and it's pretty easy to do. And like I said, we're not going to do it on everything because especially the interior, it's just not very realistic. So I'll show you really quickly what I mean, and then I'll show a couple cool tips, and then I'll do a few examples with you. But something like this is mostly just going to be something that I could probably speed through and don't really have to record the entire process for. So I have everything sort of showing up here, and I think I mentioned this before, but if you hold Alt and click on something, that'll switch to your active subtool. So I'm going to use this front plate as an example. And if I shift click on the eyeball here, we can just deselect everything. And this will be our only guy that we're working with. So currently I'm using a tablet. Up until now I've been using just a mouse and keyboard like normal, but when you're sculpting or you're in ZBrush, a tablet is definitely ideal. It's not necessary, like for the work that we're going to be doing, it's doable with a mouse, but if at all you can get your hands on a tablet, this is definitely the time to do it. So let's go ahead and press B to bring up our brushes, and we're looking for the trim dynamic tool. So we can either select it right here or hit T and D, and this is a really good brush for sculpting edge damage. You can use like a Damien standard for like little scratches. You can use a standard brush just for more general sculpting. Clay tubes is also really good for general sculpting, but the trim dynamic, as I'll show you guys here, is really nice for kind of just like clicking a bunch multiple times and just stripping away some edges here. It kind of looks like someone has some trouble, you know, putting a screw in there and maybe dinged up the edges a little bit. So then when we turn everything on and the screw's in there, it looks a little bit more like, yeah, something's kind of scratched up against it. The screw didn't just fit in there right away. The screws have been changed a few times. Like this looks very soft and perfect. This is imperfect. It makes more sense, especially being right on the front. I don't want everything to be super clean. We don't have to take it this far with the edge damage. In fact, I'm going to undo all of that. But I would like to do a bit of a pass on a lot of these things. It's a lot more strokes than I expected. yeah, so before I dive into that, I want to show you a really cool tool called Morph Targets. This is going to make it very, very safe for you to sort of go through and do a pass like this. So if we scroll all the way down here, we can go ahead and find Morph Targets, and we can hit the Store MT button. So it's storing a morph target. Now, what this does is essentially, say I'm sculpting, and I'm doing some edge damage, and I do some really, really crazy edge damage like this, and I think that I want it, so I move on to somewhere else, and I keep going, and then I forget about this. And I'm like, shit, I want to undo this, but I don't want to lose all my other work. Like, what do I do? Since we stored a morph target of this object, if we go to our brushes and we go to MT, or is it M? It's M something. It might just be, yeah, MO for morph. We can actually just paint right back on that spot, and it's going to paint that area back to what we stored our morph target as. So for a piece like this where it's a bit more complex and it's going to take a bit more time to sort of go through everything, it makes sense to store a morph target, at least while you're working on it. That way it's, yeah, you don't have to worry about sort of having a destructive workflow or anything like that. But for the time being, I'm going to use the trim dynamic with a square alpha. It's just going to give us like some harsher, sharper sort of cuts. And another brush you might like is if you hit the comma key, it's going to bring up this menu. We can actually go over to brushes. And once this all loads in, we have the trim brushes, which are really good for like cuts and edge wear. And trim smooth border is like a harsher version of trim dynamic. So if we open that, and we use our square alpha, we come in here, we're getting a lot harsher sort of cuts. I like this one for mostly wood and rocks and stuff like that, but maybe in some metal areas it might make sense. So yeah, you guys might find a good use for that. For now though, I'm going to use the trim trim, what am I doing here? Brush, trim, dynamic. There we go. Trim dynamic. You can affect the intensity up here and change the size with these square bracket keys, or by pressing S and just changing the size that way. But with all that done, I'm just going to sort of go ahead and do this piece. I'll record the whole thing, and then I'll still be recording the rest of the process, but what I'm going to be doing is speeding it up, just because pretty much everything I went over there is more or less the gist of the actual like technical behind what I do. Everything else is just going to be the execution. And I think as long as you guys can see it, if something confuses you, you can sort of figure out exactly how I'm going about it. So there's just some subtle edge damage there. I'm going to then switch to the screw. And we didn't actually dynamesh these guys, but I still feel like we should be able to get some pretty solid sculpting in here. Yep. And this is definitely overkill. Doing this on every single screw is a bit much, but something like this that's on the front, it's definitely going to be seen. I don't mind spending a little bit of time getting this extra detail in here. So just sort of lightly going over everything. In fact, one of the things I want to do, and I've been thinking about more and more, is a sort of like reflection, or maybe reflection isn't the right term, but like a post-mortem or something along those lines for this project. Once I'm done it, I kind of want to write, what worked, what didn't work, because even though I am teaching exactly my workflow here, I am learning quite a bit about it, doing a prop like this, and how I would change certain parts of it. So, for example, the screws, there's no reason to actually import all of them like I did. It might be worth just doing maybe 3 or 4 unique ones, bringing them back into my And this is before we do any ZBrush stuff. Bringing it back into Maya, and then just sort of placing them all around. That way it's like unique enough that nobody would ever notice, but you're not having to import every single screw, because when we did that in the last phase, it did eat up quite a bit of time. So it's not needed. We could honestly probably get away with just doing these ones on the front and then duplicating them everywhere, but we already have them all in ZBrush, so I'm just sort of going with it right now, and it should be fine. Chipping that away, we can also get some of these edge pieces. If you can even see that from the front, it doesn't really seem like it unless we continue this all the way. Yeah, subtle but noticeable nevertheless. Oh yeah, that's right, these are all one tool, so I might as well just do them all at once and then go back to the actual sort of frame on the front. I'm trying to keep these not super uniform, so maybe like a thin line on the bottom and a more aggressive like chip out of the metal on the top. And this is definitely polygonal, but when we zoom out even this far you can't notice, and this is going to be like this big max whenever we look at it, so I don't mind that, especially because we're going to be smoothing out the edge normal, so we will 100% not be able to see that. But these corner pieces are important to sort of scrap up a little bit, because this is where the metal would be stripping if a screwdriver was really getting in there. Okay, continue along. But yeah, pretty much this is more or less the only brush I'm going to use, unless, like I said, if I want to do scratches, I'm just pressing B and then DS will get us our dam standard. So this one by default is just like a thin, scratchy line, and if you're doing it on something with a lot of geometry and with a really small brush, it'll give you a cool scratch effect. So we'll see if we end up using that. I feel like I'm mostly just going to be chipping away edges more than anything, and that's what I kind of like to use my time in ZBrush doing. The polish is the most important part. You can get a lot of this sort of edge damage with a lot of smart materials and textures even, but I just like to have a bit more control over it by sculpting, especially if like we literally already have it in ZBrush, so we might as well. So this one I'm going to change it up and have the damage on the bottom, and then like a little lip going into the corner here. Okay, continue this up top. So there's no sort of like tiptoeing around it. This process will take a while if you go over everything. But like I said, not everything is going to need to get done. It'll probably go a lot faster than you think, especially because like this kind of work is typically enjoyable. Like I would say this is probably my favorite part of the process altogether, is when you have everything in ZBrush, all the kind of planning is non-existent at this point. It's just you sculpting. I got some music on in the background, and there's really like no way to kind of mess it up all that much because you have that morph target. So it's just kind of like thinking what looks cool and just sort of chipping away at it. There's not a lot of thinking or anything involved. Even if it does take a long time, it's generally a pretty chill time while you're doing it. So I have done things though, like something with several wood beams where it just takes forever, and it does get a bit tedious at that point. But the nice thing about this shape is it's just all variety. Like nothing other than these screws. There really isn't too much consistency throughout kind of all the different shapes we're going to be using. We're sort of working on. But since these screws are consistent, it gives us a chance to really add some variety with how we go about doing damage and all that. So I'm just going to sort of have this main area here bashed up, and just a little bit here on the edges. And you also don't have to overkill any of these pieces. Another nice thing about this workflow is, say we even if we store a morph target, we just completely get to a point where it's just not looking good, or we need to start from scratch. We can literally go to Maya, hit the export button on any of these pieces since it's already set up properly, import on top of it, smooth it, and we're good to go. It's a very, very quick repair system as far as this workflow is concerned. So these screws all have a little bit of custom damage added to them. I think I might, these front ones I want a little bit easy on. Maybe not these ones so much. Just exaggerate this a little bit more. But we can just shift click that to come back out, and we can already see we're getting a little bit more personality shining through this. So let's go back to this piece. We've chipped out these two. These two are starting to look a little bit too clean. So this has a ton of geometry on it, but if you ever find that things are looking too polygonal, feel free to just go to the geometry tab and just hit divide with smooth on. At this stage with smooth on, it's just going to be kind of averaging everything out, but it shouldn't really matter all that much. So that should be pretty safe to do. If it's changing your shape too much, just turn smooth off. But it's really, really easy to just like feel like, oh, I can see polygons here, I should divide. But in the grand scheme of things, like we are zooming in super, super close, and this is already 8 million. So when we do smooth this later on, like we are not going to see, or when we smooth the edges in Maya on this later on, we are not going to see any of this actual geo. So keep going. I'm then going to get the screws at the top and then beat up some of the, like these edges here. So yeah, like I said, this part's just the most fun. So hopefully if you're following along with your own model, whatever you're making, you can just sort of, you know, get a general gist of what's going on and then just have at it, have some fun with it. The last part was definitely one of the more repetitive and boring pieces, but it's kind of like a toss-up. There's so many different phases when you're doing something like this, it kind of goes back and forth between that. So enjoy the fun ones while you can. Just kind of chipping away. Make sure you're never just staring at something from one angle for too long. And then if I bring it back, like, yeah, we're getting a little bit of a worn down look. It'd be nice to chip up these edges a little bit, but we'll be doing that in just a minute. This part is looking pretty soft, so I don't imagine it would have too much damage. If it did, I would have to make the brush a little bit bigger, but maybe even just very, very subtle, something to break it up a little bit. And I'm just tapping pretty rapidly to sort of get that kind of look. But these are definitely like little micro details, but I don't know, I think they add a little bit of a story when you do see them. With this, we do have this sort of ball that's sticking in here as a lever. So when I think about that, I think that it would probably hit the far end and this far end quite a bit. So I'm going to kind of add like a little dent here to indicate that, and a little dent here. Just kind of makes sense, as if it's like properly hitting back and forth. Okay, let's get these guys. And that should be the last one. Okay, so if we turn everything back on, just looks like when someone was screwing that in, kind of, you know, dinged it up a little bit. I think that just makes it look a little bit better. Let's go back into this. So some other things is like edges. Where would this thing naturally get banged up if you were sort of moving it around? Like beating up this edge here doesn't make a lot of sense, or this edge here. These interior ones might be a little bit different, just because they're actually in a place where you can interact with them. So if I jump in here and I just sort of lightly bang that up, like that's a place where it would make sense, like something could actually hit that. I might even just continue it all the way down. And it's kind of hard to tell, but this is a pretty small piece, so I'm just going to continue it on a little bit. Okay. Can kind of just do the same thing in this corner. I'm not too worried about carrying it all the way down because there's not like an angle where we can actually see that. Just doing something like that. This kind of makes it feel a little bit more, you know, like an actual object. It's not perfect anywhere. It's got its little kinks and imperfections all over the place. Just getting a save here. And since we have so much stuff, the saves are definitely going to start taking a lot longer, but you should still be like manually saving your files at this point. Whenever you're working with this much geo at any given time, like ZBrush can be kind of unpredictable with how it handles it, so we'll see how this goes. Like the fact that this save is taking this long just makes me like a little bit antsy, but it should be fine. Okay, cool. Just continue. You really don't want to overdo it with this. It's very easy to just get carried away and do too much. But something subtle like that I like. Little chip-aways right there. Maybe one on this side. It's also important to look at this stuff with and without the surrounding pieces. So let's just get everything back in frame. And yeah, these edge damage pieces, I think they look pretty solid. I wouldn't actually mind having some here where it's kind of like overlapping a little bit, because it's going to catch a little bit of light here. Might want these to be just a bit bigger. Okay, cool. This main strip as well. This is where a lot of pieces are resting, so it kind of makes sense to beat it up a little bit and have the surface be a little bit more rougher. Once again, not super uniform, but just kind of sporadically placed throughout. Maybe even like a larger sort of dent or something like that. Some more visual imperfections. Just go ahead and give this side a very similar treatment. But just always be keeping in mind the actual like material you're working on. Like this is a hard plastic, this area, so it kind of makes more sense to be beaten up like this. But like the metal areas, it wouldn't really fly like this, right? So just always kind of have that in the back of your mind, as well as like a good reference image to kind of match it. And it's like super easy when you're doing this to just get like lost in the sculpt. It's pretty zen. It's pretty chill. So let's check that out. So this area is actually pretty hidden, but I kind of like that. It still breaks it up a little bit. There's definitely angles where you can see it pretty clearly. This spot is one of the most visible, so Doing something like that. And let's grab these side areas out again. I think that might be too much of a chunk. Just a bit more subtle. And I guess in certain areas you can push it a little bit further as long as it's not happening too much all over the place. And these pointed corners, I kind of just, it's a habit to just sort of do something like that. I'm obviously not going to go through all of these, like that's a bit overkill, but some of these main ones might be a bit more nice. And the other side, we can definitely see this area from the side view, so I'm gonna give it a little bit of attention. It doesn't make a ton of sense to be too damaged, so I'm just gonna chunk away a little bit. And then there is something resting here, so I'm just gonna scrape up the metal a bit. It's a bit much. Just gently tapping. Some little dents in there, but that's mostly that piece. These areas I'm not really too concerned with. It's not like they'd have a lot of dents anyways, and they're pretty soft the way they are, so I don't want to mess with them too much. But if we bring everything back, it just kind of shows like little areas that are interacting with other areas. The screws I think was a good one. These little beaten up edges. This can probably be taken further. Like even just having like one area where it's like a little bit more. A little bit more damaged, and then maybe counter it with like another spot. Little nicks along there. Just want to smooth this one out a bit. And then we do have this very, very harsh interior lip. Which is a pretty easy one to chip away at. Just very softly. we're not like taking big metallic chunks or big plastic chunks out of it. We're just, you know, showing it's aged a little bit. It's been used, it's been beaten up. It's just nice to have it be a little less even. So from a distance, like that silhouette's broken up, which is nice. And then even from the inside when you're peering over. And like it can definitely be taken further. Just the main thing we're trying to keep in mind when we're sculpting is we're not trying to change the silhouette anymore. We're just adding detail to the surface of everything. So yeah, you can really take as long or as little time as you want with this step. Realistically, if you wanted to just skip it all together, you probably could and just sort of get away with a lot of it in Painter. But like I was saying before, this is just a very, very controlled way of doing it. And it's definitely ideal to do a pass like this. So let's just bring everything back. For this piece, that's probably fine. We're not trying to make this thing totally messed up. If I select this guy again, I'm going to go to the frame now. And areas like this are like a pretty good target. Now, this is an example of, this is pretty low poly. So I'm going to undo that. I am actually going to divide this. So the poly count is pretty ridiculous on it, but it was just a little bit too polygonal. Like it was only 25% of the polys on the last piece we were working on, and this is much, much bigger. So I thought I'd go ahead and bump that up. These edges, like these are the areas that are most likely to bang into things. So it makes sense to sort of chip away at these guys. But either way, I feel like at this point you guys are probably more or less getting the picture. I do think that's a bit excessive. You can also just scrub this bar back. Okay, and with this guy I'm going to actually store a morph target just because he's quite a big one, so I am worried that I might miss some areas or want to fix some things. But anyways, this is pretty much the process I'm doing. I'm going to record the rest of this damage pass, but I'm not going to be commentating over it, so you can watch it if there's any parts where you're wondering how I might go about it. It will be recorded in this video. I'm going to put the whole thing in this video, so feel free to watch that. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy this or learn something new. Just a really, really quick damage pass to just sort of anchor everything and ground it and make it feel like it's all connected in one way or another. But that'll probably do it for the commentary section of this. So yeah, thank you guys for watching this. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of it, and I will see you in the next part where we bring it all back into Maya. Just going to stop this recording, and yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy.